Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The air inside the spa carried a hush, like a secret waiting to be told. Dim lights shimmered against polished wood, and the scent of lavender clung to every breath I took. My husband's hand brushed against the small of my back as we were guided into the massage room, warm, steady, familiar. But it wasn't his touch that made my pulse trip over itself. Across the room, she was waiting. A casual smile curved her lips, the kind of smile that doesn't just greet you, it lingers, holding you in place. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, the world outside that room ceased to exist. My skin prickled, heat blooming where her gaze lingered. We laughed lightly as the couples arranged themselves, the sound too bright, too deliberate, as though everyone sensed an undertow pulling just beneath the surface. I laid down, face turned slightly, the cotton sheet soft against my skin. My husband's hands were the first to glide across my shoulders, grounding me, steady and expected. But then, her hand brushed mine. Accidental. Or not. The soft graze of her fingertips was fleeting, but it sent a spark racing through me, quick and sharp, like striking a match. My breath caught, I didn't dare look, yet I couldn't stop myself. When I turned my head, her gaze was already waiting, eyes dark and knowing, the corner of her mouth tugging upward as though she'd heard the flutter of my heartbeat. The room was quiet, except for the low music and the sound of palms moving over skin. Still, between us, the silence was different, charged, deliberate, thick with something unspoken. I shifted, every nerve alive, wondering if she felt it too. She leaned closer, her whisper brushing the air just above my ear, teasing, playful, promising something I couldn't yet name. My husband pressed firmly into my back, steady pressure, yet I wasn't there beneath his hands anymore. My attention was locked across the narrow space, caught in her orbit. I closed my eyes, forcing calm, trying to drown in the familiar. But when I opened them again, she was there, closer than I'd expected, her presence filling every space he couldn't reach. And when my lips parted on a soft, involuntary sound, it wasn't for him. That's where it began. And that's where I'll leave you, on the edge, with one question burning: what happens when the wrong hands feel right? The first time I agreed to this spa weekend, I told myself it was for us, for me and Daniel. We had been married long enough to know each other's rhythms, long enough to finish sentences and anticipate moods. Yet, beneath that comfort, there was a silence neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Nights spent scrolling on separate screens. Conversations clipped down to logistics, bills, groceries, schedules. The kind of silence that felt heavier than arguments. Daniel, ever the optimist, thought the trip would be healing. He believed touch could mend what words could not. Maybe he was right. But deep down, I wondered if I was seeking more than healing, if I was seeking to feel wanted again, to feel the flutter of something unexpected. And then there was Mark and Elena. Friends, yes, but not in the casual sense. They had been in our lives for years, close enough to share vacations and holidays. Close enough that I'd noticed Elena's glances long before I allowed myself to believe they meant anything. She had this way of looking, not just at me, but into me, as though she sensed the words I swallowed before they ever left my lips. At dinner the night before, she leaned across the table, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her gaze lingering an extra beat. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but the spark it left in my chest was undeniable. I'd laughed too loudly at something Mark said, all while acutely aware of her foot shifting just a little too near mine under the table. Now, in the quiet of the spa room, every unspoken thought returned with sharpened edges. Daniel's hands on me were steady, but familiar to the point of predictability. Elena's nearness, by contrast, was unpredictable, dangerous in the way a flame lures a moth. I remembered the way Daniel had confessed weeks ago, late at night, how he sometimes felt like I was elsewhere even when sitting beside him. His voice had been low, not accusatory, but aching. I had no words for him then, how could I explain that my mind craved something more, something unnamed? And now, Elena was here, her touch accidental but too perfectly timed to feel like coincidence. A graze of fingertips, a playful arch of her brow, the faintest smirk that seemed to say, I know. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to stay exactly where I was. Between the four of us, there was laughter, light banter, and the polite rhythm of couples at ease. Yet under that surface ran a current only I seemed willing to feel, an undercurrent that promised either ruin or release. And when I caught Elena's eyes again, the silence between us said more than any whispered confession ever could. The question that lingered wasn't if something would happen. It was when. Dinner that evening was the kind that looked perfect from the outside, soft lighting, wine glasses catching candle flames, laughter echoing across the table. But beneath the easy conversation, the tension wound tighter with every glance, every pause too long to be casual. Daniel's hand rested lightly on my thigh under the table, a gesture meant to reassure, to claim, perhaps. Yet it only sharpened the ache I felt when I caught Elena's eyes again. Her smile was playful, but her gaze burned. She didn't look away quickly enough, and I knew she wanted me to notice. Mark was telling a story, his voice booming with cheer, and everyone laughed at the punchline. Everyone except me. I was too aware of Elena's foot brushing mine beneath the table. Just a shift, just the faintest touch, but deliberate, undeniably deliberate. My heart stumbled. I tried to steady myself by leaning into Daniel, by smiling at him, by pretending that the warmth of his palm was enough. But jealousy flickered in his eyes when he noticed the way my attention drifted. He said nothing, but the tightening of his jaw, the stiffness in his shoulders, betrayed him. And Elena saw it too. I could tell. Her lips curved into a smirk that made my stomach flutter, and not all at once. She reached for her wine glass, her fingers brushing mine, by accident. The touch lingered just a second too long. Sorry, she murmured, though her tone was anything but apologetic. Daniel's grip on my leg pressed harder, grounding me, or maybe warning me. The table felt too small, the air too thick, as if we were all playing roles in a script no one admitted existed. Mark, oblivious, raised his glass for a toast. But when we clinked glasses, Elena's gaze caught mine over the rim, daring me. And in that instant, I realized how fragile the balance was, how close we all were to stepping across a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The night stretched on with smiles and stories, but the silence beneath each word was louder than anything spoken. Something forbidden was unfolding, slow, deliberate, inevitable. And I knew I was already in too deep. The spa corridors were quiet after dinner, softened by the glow of lanterns and the hush of water flowing in hidden fountains. Daniel and Mark had gone ahead to the lounge, talking sports, their laughter echoing down the hall. I lingered, pretending to adjust the belt of my robe, though the truth was, I felt her waiting. And then Elena appeared, stepping from the shadows of the hallway with that same knowing smile. My chest tightened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence pulsed between us, full of everything we hadn't said at the table. You looked distracted tonight, she said softly, her voice low, meant only for me. Did I? My throat felt dry, my pulse too loud in my ears. She moved closer, the faint citrus of her perfume mixing with lavender from the spa oils, wrapping around me like a spell. The distance between us shrank until I could feel the warmth of her body, the brush of her sleeve against mine. It was too much, and not enough. Elena, I whispered, warning and plea tangled together. Her fingers hovered near mine, not quite touching. That almost touch sent more electricity through me than anything else could. I tried to step back, but she leaned in, her lips just shy of my ear. You don't have to pretend with me, she murmured. My breath caught. Every part of me screamed to move, to run, to do something, but I stood frozen, trapped in the gravity of her presence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Desired. Alive. Down the hall, I heard Daniel's laughter fade into distance. The window for escape was closing. Elena's hand brushed mine, this time intentional, lingering, daring. I knew if I looked into her eyes again, there would be no turning back. And still, I looked. Her gaze held mine, steady, burning, her lips parting as if she might speak, or something more. The world tilted on the edge of a moment too big to ignore. And then, footsteps. The sound of them approaching. We both froze, breathless, caught between what almost was and what still might be. The footsteps drew closer, echoing against the spa's stone floor, forcing Elena and me apart by a breath. My chest rose and fell too quickly, every muscle tight with the ache of being caught in a moment that hadn't quite happened, but almost had. It was Daniel. He appeared at the end of the hallway, his brow furrowed as he took in the scene. Just me and Elena, standing too close in the hush of lantern light. His gaze lingered, sharp, questioning. "There you are," he said, his voice too casual, too strained. "Mark's waiting in the lounge." Elena smiled effortlessly, brushing past me as though nothing had happened. "We were just catching up," she said smoothly, her hand grazing my arm in a fleeting goodbye touch that set fire to my skin. And then she was gone, leaving me alone with Daniel's eyes on me. Back in the lounge, the four of us sat together again, but the air was heavier now, weighted with suspicion and something none of us dared name. Mark poured wine, oblivious, while Daniel's hand clamped down on my knee under the table, a gesture that felt less like affection and more like a warning. And then it happened. Elena, with her usual poise, leaned forward mid-conversation, her eyes locked on me as she said, "Some desires are better confessed than hidden. Don't you think?" The words were playful on the surface, but beneath them pulsed a challenge, a revelation. My heart slammed against my ribs. Daniel's grip tightened. Mark laughed, but even he paused, his eyes narrowing just enough to suggest he'd noticed something too. I opened my mouth, but nothing came. My silence said more than I ever could. Daniel set down his glass too hard, the sound sharp, final. "If there's something you want to say," he said, his voice low, "now's the time." The room seemed to shrink, every candle flicker sharper, every breath louder. Elena's gaze was steady, daring me. Mark's eyes darted between us, confusion and suspicion warring. And I broke. "I don't know what I want anymore," I admitted, my voice trembling but unflinching. "But pretending hasn't fixed anything." Daniel's face hardened, his jaw set, but what struck me most was the flicker of pain in his eyes. Mark shifted, restless, as though a curtain had been pulled back on a play he hadn't realized he was part of. Elena didn't look away. Her smile softened, almost tender, as though this was the moment she'd been waiting for all along. The silence that followed was unbearable, too full, too raw. And just when I thought someone would speak, the lights flickered, plunging the room into shadow. A power outage. Darkness swallowed us whole. And in that darkness, a hand found mine. Not Daniel's. The blackout lasted only seconds, but in that suspended moment, everything changed. The air thickened with fear, desire, and the sound of uneven breaths. And then, in the pitch dark, a hand closed firmly around mine. Not Daniel's. I didn't move. I couldn't. The warmth of Elena's touch was unmistakable, deliberate. It was a choice, a dangerous, reckless choice, made in silence where no one could see. My heart pounded so hard I thought the sound might betray me. Then, just as suddenly as it had gone, the power surged back. Light flooded the lounge, and Elena's hand slipped away as though nothing had happened. But the betrayal lingered in Daniel's eyes. He had seen enough. His chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. "So it's true," he said, his voice sharp with hurt. "I thought I was imagining it, but no, you've been somewhere else this whole time. With her." Daniel, I began, but my voice cracked, too fragile against the storm in his eyes. Mark looked from his wife to me, his face shifting from confusion to dawning horror. Elena. Tell me this isn't what it looks like. But Elena didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair, calm in the chaos, and said, maybe it's exactly what it looks like. Maybe some truths don't need the dark to be seen. The room erupted. Daniel stood, his fists clenched, every muscle taut with betrayal. Mark's voice shook with fury, but beneath it was hurt, disbelief. And me, I sat frozen, words trapped in my throat, because for once, I couldn't hide. Tears stung my eyes. I never meant for this to happen, I whispered. But I can't deny it either. I've been lost, and she made me feel alive again. Daniel's face crumbled at that. Anger gave way to pain, raw and exposed. Mark turned to Elena, his voice breaking. And what about us? Was I just blind this whole time? Elena didn't answer him. Her eyes stayed on me, steady, unwavering, as though her silence was its own declaration. Daniel stepped back, his chest heaving. If this is what you want, he said, his voice low but final, then be honest. Don't keep pretending. The room went still. For lives tangled in a knot that could not be undone. Choices pressed down on us like weight, demanding answers. And in that silence, I felt myself standing at the edge of something irreversible. I could cling to what was safe, or I could leap into what was dangerous but true. I drew in a shaky breath, my heart aching, my pulse racing. And then, I reached out. Not for Daniel. Not for safety. For her. The decision cracked the air like thunder. And though the room erupted again, all I could feel was her hand closing over mine, this time in the full light. There was no turning back now. The storm had passed, though its echoes lingered. The lounge was no longer filled with shouts or the clatter of glasses, it was heavy with silence, broken only by shallow breaths and the faint hum of distant music. Daniel was the first to move. He stood tall, but his eyes were glassy with defeat. I can't fight what's already broken, he said softly, his voice trembling with both anger and love. But I also won't stand in the way of what you've already chosen. His gaze met mine one last time, and I saw not hatred but sorrow, the kind that comes when someone finally lets go. Mark's face was harder, more wounded. He shook his head at Elena, disbelief written across every line of him. Yet he, too, found no more words. Quietly, he set his glass down, the clink sounding final, and left the room without another glance. When the door closed behind them, only the two of us remained. My hand still rested in hers. The tension that had once felt like fire now softened into something warmer, an anchor, a lifeline. I turned to Elena, tears slipping freely now. Everything feels like it's falling apart, I whispered. And yet, with you, it feels like I'm finally standing still. Her thumb brushed against my hand, tender, reassuring. Maybe sometimes things need to fall apart so we can see what's real, she said, her voice low, steady, certain. For the first time that night, I smiled, a small, fragile thing, but honest. I leaned closer, the flicker of candlelight painting her face in gold. The world outside no longer mattered. All the doubts, the noise, the heartbreak, they blurred at the edges until only she remained. She cupped my face, her touch feather-light yet grounding. Our foreheads met, and the closeness carried no more games, no more teasing tension, only truth. I closed my eyes, breathing her in, and when her lips finally brushed mine, it wasn't reckless or forbidden anymore. It was release. It was peace. The kiss lingered, slow and deliberate, a promise formed in silence. When we pulled back, her eyes searched mine, and in them, I saw the future, not without challenge, but with something worth holding on to. The candles around us burned low, the wine forgotten, the night heavy with the weight of endings and beginnings. And in that room, under the quiet glow of a fading flame, we chose each other. Not in secrecy, not in fear, openly, bravely, and completely. It wasn't the story I had expected to write with my life. But it was, at last, a love story.